Welcome to Free Science Fiction Stories. Today's story is Red Dust, where a buried alien craft is uncovered beneath the sands of Mars. A team of researchers ventures inside, only to awaken something far more sinister than they could have imagined.
Red dust. The wind had barely settled. Fine red dust still coiled into the air, carried on dying gusts, shrouding the wreckage in a shifting haze. Beneath the thick visor of his helmet, Noah Vance narrowed his eyes, sweeping his gaze across the exposed ruin. The storm had peeled back layers of Martian sand like flesh from bone, revealing something that should not have been there. The wreck loomed before them, half buried in the rust-colored dunes, its jagged silhouette casting long, twisted shadows in the fading sunlight. It was wrong. Noah tightened his grip on his scanner, suppressing the unease curling in his gut. The others, geologists, biologists, engineers, murmured excitedly over the comms, their voices filled with barely restrained wonder. But Noah wasn't here to marvel at an ancient mystery. He was here because command needed answers. Structural integrity looks unstable, he muttered into his mic, his breath fogging the inside of his visor. No telling how deep this thing goes. We tread lightly, Martinez nodded in agreement. Despite his warning, Dr. Elias Carter, the team's biologist, had already stepped closer, boots crunching against the frost-crusted sand. "Just look at it," he whispered, his voice barely registering over the low hum of suit systems. This is history." Noah wasn't so sure. The wreck was a fusion of two distinct technologies, grotesquely merged together as though some cruel hand had forced incompatible pieces to fit. One side was smooth and metallic, its surface corroded but undeniably artificial, almost human. Long, skeletal struts reached toward the sky, blackened as if from atmospheric re-entry. Portions of it were caved inward, bent in unnatural ways, as though something immense had crushed them with deliberate force. But the other half, that was something else entirely. It was rigid, uneven, its surface not quite metal, not quite organic. Deep grooves and curling spines jutted from its structure like exposed tendons. Pale bioluminescent veins pulsed faintly beneath the ridges, casting an eerie glow that flickered in the Martian dusk. Some parts looked melted, like they had grown into the smooth metal rather than being attached. The fusion wasn't clean. It was violent, like two living creatures had been fused together mid-struggle. Noah's suit sensors ticked with mild radiation warnings. Faint energy readings pulsed from deep within the ruin. Whatever had happened here, it was still lingering. "Keep chatter to a minimum," he instructed. "Let's sweep the exterior before anyone goes inside." Carter let out a quiet chuckle. "Paranoid much?" Noah ignored him, stepping forward, his boots sinking slightly into the dust. His fingers danced across the holographic interface of his wrist scanner, running diagnostics on the exposed sections. The readout flickered erratically. Whatever this thing was, it was still bleeding signals into the void. Old, weak, but not quite dead. They slowly walked around the outside of the wreck, examining every facet of its heavily worn surface. The sky above them darkened as the sun dipped below the dunes, turning the sky a deeper shade of ochre. The Martian horizon stretched on endlessly, vast and empty, as if to emphasize just how alone they truly were. The colony was miles away, nothing but a speck against the wasteland. If anything went wrong here, no one would be coming in time to help. "Look at these markings," said Ava, the team's geologist. She ran a gloved hand along the smoother portion of the wreck, revealing deep gashes along the metal. Noah exhaled sharply. Something hit this thing hard enough to punch through this plating. Carter, undeterred, continued his examination. Or something inside was trying to get out. The wind howled once more, the dust swirling around them like ghostly tendrils. Noah cast a wary glance toward the yawning entrance of the wreck, where the shadows ran deep. His suit lights barely penetrated the darkness within. Noah hesitated at the entrance, scanning the jagged tear in the hull. It wasn't just damage. It wasn't a clean break, as if from impact. It was burst outward. Something inside had forced its way through, rending the thick metal plating like torn flesh. The edges curled outward, blackened from what looked like extreme heat, but the fractures along the seams suggested something far more violent than fire. "What happened here?" Ava whispered, her helmet light casting flickering shadows along the warped metal. "That's not right." Noah stepped forward cautiously, his boots crunching against the fractured remnants of the hull. A hollow wind whistled through the opening, kicking up dust that had settled for who knows how long. It was time to go inside. The darkness was profound. The corridor beyond was a cavern of twisted metal and alien ridges. The ceiling loomed unevenly, cables hanging like sinew. Noah's light swept across the walls. Patches of it looked melted, as if exposed to extreme temperatures, but in places the metal had grown back in unnatural formations. It looked almost organic, regrown in ridges and bulbous protrusions, veins of bioluminescent energy threading beneath its surface. Noah placed a gloved hand against the nearest wall. The moment he did, a low hum vibrated through his suit. He jerked his hand away. "You feel that?" Carter glanced over, eyes flicking to his wrist scanner. "I'm picking up residual energy readings. Weak, but definitely something." "Still active?" Ava asked, stepping closer to examine the strange, gnarled structure that had regrown over what must have once been clean metal. Noy shook his head. "Not active, just lingering, like it's dormant." The further they ventured, the worse the temperature dropped. Noah's suit registered the shift, his HUD blinking a warning. Internal temperature, -92 degrees. He frowned. That wasn't possible given the temperature just outside. "This thing's been buried for centuries," Carter murmured. "Even if there was some kind of internal reactor running, it should be radiating heat, not—" A crunch. Everyone froze. Noah turned his light downward, casting the beam over a brittle, blackened husk that had shattered beneath his boot. He lifted his foot slowly. The thing had once been human-shaped, but the proportions were all wrong. Beneath the frost-crusted remains of its tattered suit, the skeleton was elongated, too many joints in the fingers, the ribcage stretching too far down. Its helmet had been shattered, the visor clawed open from inside. Martinez exhaled sharply. This isn't human." Ava turned and raised her light to the walls. The beams illuminated deep gouges, raked across the surface in unnatural, erratic patterns. Noah knelt beside the corpse, examining the shattered visor. It had been human once, or something close enough to pass. The skeletal structure suggested it was very close to something like one of them. But the gouges in the walls told a more immediate story. They weren't from tools, weren't from excavation. They were fingernail deep, stretching across the metal in jagged trails. "We should go," Ava whispered, her voice suddenly unsteady. Carter remained transfixed, staring at something a few feet away. Noah followed his gaze. A containment pod of some kind. Its glass was cracked, the metal seams ruptured outward. The inside was slick with bioluminescent residue, the same pulsing veins that ran through the walls. The thing inside had broken out, long, long ago. And that's when Noah's HUD registered movement. His breath stilled. He turned his light sharply. Nothing was there. Noah could feel the cold creeping through his suit, the temperature dropping even further as they moved deeper into the ruin. Every step felt heavier, his breath louder in the confines of his helmet. Ava shivered. "This place is wrong." Noah didn't answer. He was focused on the path ahead, his light cutting through the thick dust that had settled over the wreckage like a burial shroud. They moved in cautious formation, Ava to his left, Carter just behind. Their shadows stretched in grotesque shapes against the warped walls, flickering as their beams passed over more containment units. Some were shattered like the first. Their interiors were coated with the same bioluminescent residue, pulsing faintly, the color shifting in rhythm with the dim vibrations that still hummed beneath their boots. Others were intact. Noah's breath hitched as his light fell upon one of them. It was still active. The glass was dark, almost black, but as he stepped closer, a faint movement stirred within. It wasn't violent or fast. This one breathed. The glass flexed outward with each pulse, bowing slightly before sinking back into place, like a lung struggling to draw air. Noah raised his rifle instinctively, the weight of it suddenly too small, too ineffective. Dr. Carter stepped closer, scanning the pod with his wrist sensor. "It's drawing power from somewhere," he muttered, adjusting his instruments. There's bioelectric activity inside, but I can't tell if it's..." The glass twitched. A handprint pressed against the inside. Not human. 3 long fingers, spindly and wrong, ending in sharp, hooked claws. The surface of the glass rippled at the contact, like it wasn't entirely solid. The fingers curled slightly, as if testing the surface. Noah exhaled sharply, gripping his rifle tighter. "Back up. Now!" Carter ignored him, stepping even closer. "The structure of the pod it's not just glass, it's membrane. Some kind of reactive..." He reached out, barely grazing the bioluminescent streaks coating the outside of the pod. His suit glitched. The lights on his HUD flickered, static crackling in his ears. For a split second, Noah saw his own reflection on Carter's visor, distorted. Wrong. Then Carter gasped, jerking his hand back. The moment his fingers left the residue, the distortion stopped. His suit lights stabilized. Noah grabbed his arm. "Carter, what was that?" The scientist was breathing heavily, his eyes wide behind his visor. I don't know. It felt like something pushed back. Like it was inside my suit for a second." Ava's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. "Guys, the dust outside just moved." Noah turned, his heart hammering. Through the gash in the hull, the Martian horizon stretched out in dull, rust-colored vastness. The wind had died. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dunes. And the sand near the wreck was shifting. Not blowing, not drifting. Something beneath it was stirring. A long, sinuous ripple passed through the dust, the surface breaking apart in small, unnatural waves, as if something was waking up underneath. Noah's fingers curled around his weapon. The glass of the containment pod bulged outward. The handprint pressed harder. The glass strained, groaning, something moving beneath its dark surface. Then it let out a sound. Not a scream, not a screech. A whistle, low, hollow, melodic. And from deeper inside the wreck, something answered. The lights died, plunging the alien corridors into near-absolute darkness. A burst of static hissed through Noah's comms, sharp and grating, like a distant scream stretched into white noise. His HUD flickered wildly, suit diagnostics flashing corrupted data, before stabilizing in a dim, barely readable glow. A deep, unnatural cold pressed against him through the insulation of his suit, the silence around him, impossibly vast, thick with something unseen. Then Ava screamed, a sharp, strangled cry that cut through the darkness like a knife. It was over too fast. Noah spun, flashlight beams slicing through the corridor, illuminating swirling dust and metal warped by unknown forces. Ava was gone. His heart slammed against his ribs as he stepped forward, eyes darting between the jagged remains of containment pods and rust-red walls. The dust settled in sluggish spirals where she had stood just seconds before. His breath rasped through his helmet, the sound harsh and too loud in his ears. Static crackled again in his comms, this time softer, fractured, broken into bursts of distorted sound. Then something else. Breathing. It was shallow, erratic, laced with quiet, trembling gasps. Ava! Noah's grip tightened on his rifle, knuckles aching inside his gloves. Ava? His voice was hoarse, too small in the vast emptiness of the ship. Where are you? Say something. A long silence followed. Then a sound. Wet, organic, wrong. A slow, deliberate tearing noise. Something heavy shifting against metal. Noah swallowed hard, dread settling like a lead weight in his chest. He took a step forward, his flashlight shaking slightly in his grip as he scanned the corridor. His suit's sensors were useless, the readings flickering in and out, registering movement where there was none. His light flickered. Something moved in the dark. A silhouette shifted at the periphery of his vision. He turned his beam toward it, catching only the faintest glimpse of something jagged and inhuman, its limbs too long, its joints bending backward in unnatural, insect-like fashion. Noah's breath caught in his throat as his flashlight beam settled on eyes, not one, not two, but rows of glistening black orbs, reflecting the light with an eerie alien intelligence. The creature's head was pyramid-shaped, its edges gleaming faintly in the dim glow. Its body shifted, slow, as if studying him. Then, movement again, another shape further down the corridor, its form barely visible in the shifting darkness. And then another. Noah's pulse thundered in his ears as the realization settled over him. They weren't attacking. They were watching. Waiting. Ava's comm feed cut out. Noah's fingers twitched against the trigger of his rifle, every muscle in his body tensed, screaming at him to move, to run, to do something. But he didn't. He couldn't. He was trapped, caught in the gaze of something that should not exist, something that was neither man nor machine, neither beast nor ghost. At least not as they understood those terms. And then, at last, it made a sound. A long, melodic whistle, low, rising, echoing through the corridors like a distant alien song. It didn't breathe, it didn't move, it just watched. Noah's fingers trembled around his rifle, his pulse hammering so hard it made his hands feel numb. Then it whistled, low, measured, deliberate. The sound sent a primal chill ripping down Noah's spine. And suddenly the others broke. Dr. Carter ran first, his breath ragged in Noah's headset. "We have to move. Go. Go." Noah was right behind him, forcing his legs into motion as his instincts finally overrode his frozen terror. The ship was shifting around them. The paths they had taken minutes before were different now, warping, twisting, funneling them somewhere else. Gunfire erupted. Sharp, deafening blasts of automatic rifle fire in the enclosed space. Sparks flew where the bullets struck the walls, the chitinous ridges along the corridors barely reacting to the impacts. Noah glanced back just in time to see another of the creatures move. No, vanish, flowing into the darkness like a shadow slipping beneath a door. "Where are they going?" someone screamed. The answer came in a blur of black limbs and silent precision. "Carter!" Something lunged from the left, moving through the darkness in a sickeningly graceful motion, a flash of jointed claws and glinting eyes. Carter had only half turned when it took him. No sound of impact, no scuffle, just a single, gasping gurgle as he was yanked backward into the dark. His rifle clattered against the floor, spinning away, and his body was gone before it had even finished falling. Noah barely had time to register Carter's disappearance before his radio crackled to life. Not a scream, not a cry for help, just static. And then, layered beneath the distortion, a faint melodic whistle. The walls were wrong. Noah barely noticed the transition at first. His focus had been on the constant movement in the dark, the shifting shapes that always lurked just out of reach. But now, as his boots pounded down the corridors, he saw it in full. The sharp-edged metal of the ship's human-like sections had vanished. In its place, the corridors curved, smooth yet ribbed, like the inside of a living thing. The pulsing ridges along the walls were patterns. They moved almost imperceptibly, like something breathing. Noah's lungs burned as he pressed forward, turning a corner too fast and nearly colliding with what must have been a warped control panel. He stumbled, catching himself against a half-decayed console, its surface coated in a thin layer of bioluminescent grime. The screen above it flickered, symbols flashing in an alien language. But for a moment, just a second, they almost made sense. A signal pulsed through the room. A low-frequency hum vibrated through Noah's chest, a sound so deep and resonant that it felt rather than heard. It repeated in slow intervals like a heartbeat. Something was transmitting. The realization slammed into him. "This ship isn't dead," he said. Martinez, panting, pressed against a console beside him, staring at the half-decayed tech with wide, panicked eyes. "Then, what is it doing?" The tremors started. The entire ship shuddered, dust shaking loose from the ribbed walls, the sound of cracking rock echoing through the tunnels. Noah stumbled, grabbing onto the console for balance. Something massive was moving outside. The sensation was unmistakable. Deep, subterranean vibrations, the kind that weren't caused by a simple cave-in. Noah turned to Martinez, breathless. "We have to move." Then the creature screeched. It wasn't the whistle this time, it was something different. Raw, untethered, violent. Noah spun, raising his rifle just as the first one lunged. He fired. The muzzle flash lit up the corridor in a stuttering blaze, revealing the full horror in front of him. 4 creatures, moving on 3 legs, their elongated limbs propelling them forward in grotesque, inhuman strides. Their pyramid-shaped heads turned in eerily similar motions, black eyes lining their edges, unblinking, locked onto him. Noah grabbed Martinez by the shoulder, pulling him toward the exit. "Go!" Martinez turned to run, too late. A claw speared through his suit, puncturing his torso with a swift, efficient strike. His screams filled Noah's comms for half a second before static consumed it. Noah didn't look back. He ran, heart hammering as he burst through the corridor, barely dodging the collapsing debris raining from above. The walls twisted, closing in around him. It was reacting, recoiling from his presence. He turned the final corner and saw his only chance. An exposed hull breach. A jagged wound in the side of the wreckage, leading out into the Martian surface. The light outside was faint, a sickly red glow seeping in through the storm's haze. The wind kicked up fine, blood-colored dust, swirling through the torn metal like a spectral fog. Noah climbed, scrambling toward the opening, hands clawing for purchase as his boots slipped against the shifting debris. Behind him, the creatures didn't pursue. They stood just beyond the threshold, watching. Not moving, not attacking, just waiting. Then the whistle returned, low, melodic, calling. Noah threw himself into the storm outside. Noah staggered forward, his breathing hard as he clawed his way through the dust-choked air. The Martian storm had thickened, swirling in agitated spirals, its crimson haze shifting with an almost unnatural fluidity. The wreckage loomed behind him, its grotesque fused metal jutting into the storm like broken teeth. He was alive, outside, free. His boots sank into the fine Martian soil, the impact kicking up thin plumes of rust-colored powder. Every step felt wrong, his body screaming with exhaustion, but he forced himself forward, each movement deliberate. He expected the creatures to follow, to lunge, to rip him back into the dark, to finish what they had started. But they didn't. They stood just behind the breach, their elongated forms shrouded in the ship's shadows, their pyramid-shaped heads tilted in eerie synchronization. Unmoving, unrushed, watching. Then one of them moved. Not forward, not toward him. It raised a clawed limb, its jagged fingers extending in a way that wasn't quite a threat but wasn't an offer of peace either. A gesture. Noah froze, bile rising in his throat. His mind screamed at him to run, to fire, to do something, but his body remained rigid, locked in place. The creatures turned in unison, their attention shifting away from Noah entirely. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking down. The ground trembled again. A sudden pulse radiated outward from the ship, a deep, low thrum that Noah could feel in his chest, even through his suit. The dust lifted in waves, shifting in a rippling motion, as if responding to an unseen force. Noah's visor display flickered, error messages flashing in rapid succession. Magnetic interference detected. OSHA malfunction. Unknown signal interference. The pulse came again, deeper this time. Noah turned, his body moving before his mind caught up, staring back at the half-buried ship. Noah staggered backward, his pulse hammering in his ears as the alien signal surged through the thin Martian air. He couldn't hear it in the traditional sense, not through the dead silence of the planet's near, non-existent atmosphere, not through his suit's layers of insulation, but he could feel it. A deep, resonant thrum, like the beating of an ancient heart, pulsed through the soil, shaking the wreckage, rattling the very air with something that shouldn't exist. His HUD flashed warnings, his comms blinking erratically. The signal was overriding everything, burrowing into the frequencies his suit operated on, twisting them into garbled static. He didn't need his instruments to tell him the truth. He'd felt it in his gut the moment the creatures stopped hunting him. The ship wasn't just a derelict wreck. It was a beacon, and something out there had heard the call. Noah turned his gaze skyward, his breath sharp in his lungs. The Martian dust storm had begun to clear, unveiling the heavens above. A dark, endless void stretching far beyond the reach of human ambition. The stars burned like cold, indifferent gods, distant and silent. But something moved among them. A shadow, vast, shifting against the backdrop of space, swallowing the pinpricks of light as it descended. His visor struggled to process what he was seeing, flickering through filters, attempting to define an object that had no right to be there. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a fleet. It was a presence. A mass of impossible geometry, writhing like a living thing, edges folding into themselves, shifting in and out of perception. It wasn't just coming toward Mars. It was spreading across the sky. His chest tightened. How far away was it? How much time did he have to warn the colony? The sky above boiled. The distant shadow had grown, stretching across the horizon, a colossal shape blotting out the stars, its surface writhing like liquid darkness. It was no fleet, no war machine. It was something older, something that had been waiting. He threw himself into a run, stumbling through the Martian dust, sprinting as fast as his suit allowed. Noah tried to start the rover his team had come in on. It wouldn't start. All of the electronics were malfunctioning. No radio or satellite communications. He decided to make a run for it, but after only a short way, his legs threatened to give out beneath him. The colony was miles away. He wouldn't make it on foot, but he had to keep trying. He had to warn them. The wreck behind him groaned, a low, hollow sound like a hum in the opening of a vast throat. A final pulse radiated outward, stronger than before, a command reaching across the void. It was what the pulses had been calling for, and now it had arrived.
Enjoy this story? Subscribe to Free Science Fiction Stories for daily sci-fi adventures.